I just got done watching Dan Farah's film that dropped very early this morning, The Age of Disclosure. And I just want to share my initial reactions to it. First of all, I will say that the B-roll and background cinematography was beautiful. This was not a film that they rushed or did not think through properly or did not put a lot of money into it. That's very clear. Even the background music is very compelling as it accompanies all the different interviews and so forth. The other thing that I will say is that the archives they use in this film are extraordinary. They include so many clips from historical news events, from various mainstream news shows that really remind you of what's taken place over the past 7 years in a very effective way. And also, so it's all threaded together and gives credibility and continuation perspective to what's happened since the New York Times article was released. And it really covers everything that I think it needed to cover. And by doing that, it helps the viewer understand how important this topic is. And I think it's easy to overlook how difficult that is to pull off and how important that is to include. Because if you just look at the UFO issue as a mystery or a scientific enigma, you're really missing the point. And I think The Age of Disclosure masterfully constructed the film so that once the viewer is done watching it, there's no way they could walk away and say, UFOs, pretty interesting, but not really that important. There's more important things going on. And there's many important things going on. But UFOs is definitely way up there. And one of the ways they underscore that is by going into the alleged sub-Rosa Cold War among different nations to be the first to master these technologies so that they can have military superiority. So obviously that elevates the UFO topic beyond it's an amazing mystery, let's get to understand it, to it has real world consequences. It's not just spiritual or scientific. There is an incredibly strong geopolitical thread with this topic. Okay, so I'm going to cover a couple quotes from the movie that we can discuss. This is obviously not a massively planned out video because I quickly wanted to get this completed the same day that the movie launched. So I'm just going to kind of read, in no particular order necessarily, some quotations that stood out to me. First quote, and I believe it's by Lou Elizondo, and I quote, "To be clear, non-human intelligence has been actively conducting ISR, intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance of some of our most sensitive U.S. military facilities and nuclear sites. They have both deactivated and activated nuclear weapons with both the United States and Russia. The nuclear weapons that were activated in Russia were pointed at us. And from that perspective, the stakes really could not be any higher. This is an emerging and disruptive threat for the United States and truly a national security concern. And by the way, this isn't just happening here in the United States. This is happening all over the world and it is occurring with greater frequency." So just like my last point, this further emphasizes the real world consequences of UFOs. It's not just about the mystery in terms of where they come from, what their biology is like, but it's also about their engagement with closely surveilling and investigating U.S. and other military operations and capabilities. And as a civilization, we should probably strive to understand why they are doing this, because at this point, we can only speculate. The following quote is Jay Stratton speaking, and in fairness, I tried to make the quotes as accurate as I could, but the transcription may not be perfect when I recorded some of the quotes. So this quote is about the disinformation campaign, and I think that's so important because, again, this underscores the real world consequences of the UFO topic. Not only is it a national security concern because we don't know why they're here and what they're doing, and their presence has led to an alleged sub-rosa Cold War for nations to back engineer these technologies for military superiority, but it also has led to other governments, and certainly the U.S. government, lying to its own citizens. So the UFO issue is entrenched in how it impacts civilization. It's not just spiritual. It's not just scientific. There are real world consequences that exceed the conversation that's usually had within ufology. So I'm going to give you this quote now by Jay Stratton. This effort was to destroy my reputation and credibility, full stop. When the government started running the despicable disinformation campaign against Lou, I actually received an email one day from the Pentagon Public Affairs Office with this narrative that they were providing back to the media that was completely false. And I replied to all of that email and said, this is wrong, and they ran with it anyways. So he received an email regarding what they were trying to pass as truth. He told them, nope, that's false. And yet, I think it was Susan Goff that was sending the email. The Pentagon still went with the narrative that, according to Jay Stratton, was false. And then here's another quote. They actually told the American people that Lou Elizondo did not work there, and that was an outright lie. So this is, as I recall, this is where Susan Goff, as I recall, was saying that Lou Elizondo had nothing to do with ATIP when he actually did. Now, I think as a society, and I hate to say this, and maybe I'm wrong to go this far, but this is my bias. We should really assume that Aero is not an honest broker until they can prove otherwise. They do not, at this point, they do not deserve the benefit of the doubt. And I can demonstrate that in 3 or 4 different ways, which I'm going to do for you now. First of all, there's this scenario that I just conveyed to you that is included in the Age of Discovery film. But then, more recently, Dr. James Lukatsky was on the Weaponized podcast, and he said that he literally went to the Intelligence Community Inspector General and the Department of Defense or Department of War Inspector General, telling them that Aero was lying about OSAP. So there's another credible person revealing that Aero has been lying. Add on to it former Rear Admiral Timothy Gallaudet. He was in one of the hearings recently. And in that hearing, he said that when he went to Aero, as I recall, they were trying to persuade him that the USS Nimitz UFO event series was a nothing burger, and it's not what people like Commander David Fravor and Alex Dietrich were trying to or were communicating. So there's another third incident where Aero just does not come off as an honest broker. And then another incident is with UFO whistleblower Dylan Borland. He said during the hearing that in regards to the 100-foot equilateral triangle that he reported that he saw, when Representative Nancy Mace was asking him about it, he said, if you want to know more about that triangle, contact Aero because they have the answer. Which means that Aero was not giving Congress, which is the oversight body, which are trying to get to the bottom of the UFO issue, the information that would have been relevant to them. So there's 4 scenarios, and there's more, I'm sure. In fact, I know there's more. But there's 4 scenarios that makes Aero simply look at like a disinformation activity versus an honest broker doing the will of Congress. Congress are who set up that program. And so because of that, and because of this documentary by Dan Farah, I hate to say it, and I don't take pleasure in it, and maybe I'm going too far, but I feel like we should just assume that Aero is part of the cover-up and not part of the solution. Just for the sake of accuracy, let me correct myself real quickly. Susan Goff was never part of Aero as far as I am concerned, so we can't really use that to demonstrate that Aero is not an honest broker, but the other events do, in my opinion. I think the next quote is by Dr. Hal Puthoff. The intelligence officials that have briefed on these crash retrievals have talked about a number of different species having been observed to be associated with the crash. Bodies recovered are not all the same type. I'm aware of at least 2 advanced non-human species, one of which made contact with the legacy crash retrieval program. The other of which the bodies were recovered by the crash retrieval program in various crashes. So that's absolutely fascinating that he stated that he's aware of multiple species and that one of them made contact with the crash retrieval program. That's an enormous bombshell. And that gets me thinking about what David Grush has been worried about. He discovered during his investigation when he was the liaison with the UAP task force when he was working for the NRO, the National Reconnaissance Office, as I recall, that there might be an agreement that the United States government has made with non-human intelligence. That could explain what I think that I think it was Dr. Hal Puthoff saying that one of these beings or one of these species made contact with the legacy program. Like, why is the legacy program making contact with a non-human intelligent species, right? What's that about? And you know, if that did indeed happen, it's like, okay, how messed up is that a non-human intelligent species is communicating with the crash retrieval program instead of communicating with the global population. And I'm just going to paraphrase what I want to talk about here. I'm trying to limit how many quotes I pull from the film. So Dr. Hal Puthoff talked about how, as I recall, these crashes are happening not just in the United States, but in China and in Russia. And the question arises, and not just crashes, but also something more akin to donations, like landings. And of course, crashes could also be donations if they were done intentionally. And how would we know if they're done intentionally or not? But what he said was that, how do we know that these non-human intelligences are engaging every nation equally? Like, for example, are more donations being given to China than the United States, or Russia than the United States, or more to the United States than Russia or China? That is such a fascinating question. And then he said, like, well, maybe it's like some kind of like IQ test. Let's see what nation can figure out our technology first and go the furthest with it. I mean, these are legitimate questions to the crash retrieval situation that is allegedly happening. I'm just going to share 2 more quotes and then I'll talk more generally about the film. Here's a quote, I believe, from Dr. Hal Puthoff, and I quote, "Fine, and there's no real threat there. But the truth of the matter is, you have to take into account, well, under what condition you know that might change. For example, if you have ants at the back of your yard, they're not a threat to you, so that's fine. But if they come and invade your house, you know, suddenly they're a threat. And so it can be the same in this situation. So at least within the defense and intelligence industry, we automatically assume the worst because we want to be prepared against the worst if it should happen." One thing I noticed about this film is there is next to no threat narrative. If I were to rate the degree of threat narrative in this film out of 10, it'd be 1.5. And that's me being charitable to people that think there's a threat narrative. Even Lou Elizondo in the film said that we are a very violent species. So you could even argue the film portrays humanity as a big part of the problem. And what Hal Puthoff was saying in that quote I just gave you is basically that we are beginning to become more advanced technologically with weaponry, nuclear capabilities, and maybe some classified capabilities that have even exceeded nuclear capabilities. And so it is plausible that these non-human intelligences will one day say, you know, you've been primitive for a very long time, but now you're starting to advance to an extent where we don't feel so comfortable with what you're able to do. And if that moment ever comes, theoretically, the non-human intelligences could intervene in some way, shape, or form. That's the line of thinking that Dr. Hal Puthoff was sharing. And I think it's a meritorious perspective to consider. And again, since there is no open contact, we are left with no choice but to fill in the blanks because we really don't know what's going on. And I don't think that perspective that Hal Puthoff shared is an unreasonable one. I think it's a very fair one. Here's the last quote that I'm going to share, and believe me, this is not even remotely a replacement for the film. I barely shared anything with you. It's a great film, and I highly recommend it. And after I share this last quote, I'll go further into my impression and my perspective on the quality of this film and the implications. This one, again, is by Dr. Hal Puthoff, and I quote, "Sitting here in a Senate building, recognizing what change has been occurring, I never thought I'd see this day come, frankly. And now that I see it here, I am unbelievably hopeful that it's going to filter down into our society to where everyone realizes that the human species is actually in a melting pot of many species throughout the galaxy. What I expect to come out of this is, first of all, a greater appreciation of what it means to be a human. And to me, that kind of change on the human character is probably more significant than what we can learn about atoms and molecules and propulsion systems. My grandchildren are going to grow up taking into account and thinking about the fact that the universe is full of life." That was a beautiful quote or opinion, which I'm quoting, by Dr. Hal Puthoff. And it's a very humanizing quote. And I think one thing that you'll recognize about this film, this is a very human film, believe it or not. It's not just factoids and analysis. It's a very human film. And there's 34 high-level senior officials in it, whether from like the military or the U.S. government or aerospace corporations. It's really impressive. You know, before diving into this film, you might anticipate that it's kind of going to be sterile, but I don't think it is sterile. I think it's kind of beautiful in a sense because it is people that a lot of them who have been read into classified programs and information and know firsthand that this is real, grappling with the cover-up, grappling with the implications of this reality, and in good faith, as I can tell, trying to inform the public. And as I said before, there's really not much of a threat narrative in this film. So if you're looking to confirm your bias that this is like a psyop, it's going to be pretty hard to do. It's going to be pretty hard to do. It really comes off as a blueprint, if you will, of what has been going on for 80 years that has been behind closed doors that the U.S. government has not wanted you to know. This does not come off as a cheerleader for the United States government. It does not come off as damage control for the United States government. It comes off as a very objective and sincere take of the situation we find ourselves in. So now the question is, where is this all headed? And, well, for starters, there has been more media attention to the UFO topics surrounding this film than there has been since David Grush came forward and had the hearing that he was in 2023. That's huge. That's number one. I mean, it's been on CNN, it's been on Fox News, it's been in the New York Times, just as a small list. In addition, it's leading to other outcomes. A new David Grush interview is coming out today on Fox News. And furthermore, James Fox has recently stated that there's a whole movement behind this film. It's not just a documentary. He said, or at least implied, that there are going to be a coalition of whistleblowers that are going to come forward asking, or pleading, I should say, the Trump administration to remove their NDAs so that they can testify to congressional committees. That should be a big deal. And I also, when I was just checking some of my Twitter account, I came across Dan Farah, the director of this film. He was on Joe Rogan today. And I'm sure there's a lot of interesting things he said, and I'm going to cover his interview in another video. But one thing he said is that the Trump administration is aware of this film, and they're in talks on how to respond to this film. So if you did find this film disappointing, I think there is some hope that this film is more of a trigger for further action than something in a vacuum or isolated. Now, I'm going to rate this film. I'm going to give this film a 9 out of 10. It was so well done. It covered what was really important. As I earlier stated, the cinematography and the B-roll and the background music was beautiful. And yes, there is a tinge of disappointment. And I'll explain to you what I mean by that. We didn't get disclosure from it, nor did I expect us to. But tomorrow morning, when we all wake up in our bed, we're still going to be in a pre-disclosure world under a psyop, the ultimate psyop, which is the cover-up. People get so in the weeds of this whistleblower might be trying to steer the narrative and this and that, and it's like, I understand, right? I understand skepticism of whistleblowers. Even though I think if you're going to imply that they're steering the narrative, you have to isolate what that narrative is. Otherwise, you're just expressing vibes. You're not really making an argument. But either way, the bottom line is that the cover-up still persists. And when you've been following this topic as long as a lot of us have, you do get into this psychology that anything short of disclosure has a tinge of disappointment. And that's just a psychological reality, and I get it. I experience it too. But I'm very excited to see what's going to happen next. And as I've said many times before, the sitting National Security Advisor to the President of the United States and the Secretary of State, Marco Rubio, was very prominent in this film and talked about how there is a cover-up and how there's not oversight and how even presidents are not read into this reality. So I can't imagine there's going to be no journalists following up on those statements. If journalists don't follow up on the statements that have been made in this film, then I must live in the Twilight Zone. But we'll leave it at that. I'm very interested to see what happens after this film. I highly recommend it. Please do not forget to subscribe. If you'd like to support the channel, you can become a patron, you can become a YouTube member, you can give me a one-time donation. All those potentialities can be accessed in the description box below, or you can just slap a like on this bad boy, and I'll appreciate it so much. Thanks so much for watching. I look forward to seeing you in the next episode.